As we look for areas that unite us as a country now, there's one that just stands out. We're all aging. Whether you're 20 to 80, we're all getting older. And there are more of us now in retirement every year as we approach this important age. And today we're going to discuss this issue. The issue of retirement security is something that really plays on so many people in our country, but particularly in this district as well. And it's an issue for saving for retirement, how you approach it, what happens when you're there. And as we all know, retirement is not even, because retirement is linked with wage in so many instances, how much you make, what your employer has for a plan, how much you had to start out with if you had money left in your family as a base. And it's happening too when we're having non-traditional working conditions, where some people aren't working a full week. Some people have 2 or more jobs. People are working remotely with different plans. There could be independent contractors and a regular job. There could be so many variations, and that just complicates things more. And as I mentioned, in this region here in southeastern Massachusetts, particularly in the Cape Cod region, it's the oldest, demographically oldest region outside of Florida in the country, I've been told. So we have a particular interest right here, but it's something we share as a country. And it's something we share in terms of whether there are certain disparities. Women and men, the different incomes affect retirement security. People of color, minority groups have different demographics too. So it's not a simple one-size-fits-all. But today we're joined with an all-star panel here, and they will be giving very practical, pragmatic advice to all of you, whether you're 20 years old, whether you're 70 or 80 years old, in terms of how to help yourself and your families through this position. And we also know that this is an issue that's been not enough attention to in Congress. And we're going to talk about some of the things that have been done that will be helpful and some of the things we can do in that regard as well. So I'd like to introduce our panelists here today. To my left is Kathleen Kennedy Townsend, and she is the Secretary's representative for pensions and retirements at the Department of Labor. Welcome, Kathleen.
It's good to be here.
Andrew Eschtruth, who's the Associate Director for External Relations at the Center for Retirement Research in Boston College.
Thank you.
Andrew.
Pleasure to be here.
Mark Iwry, who's a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institute and the former senior advisor to the United States Secretary of the Treasury. Welcome.
Good to be with you, Congressman.
And lastly, we have 2 Andys aboard today. Andy Schreiner, who's the Senior Vice President of Fidelity, dealing with retirement issues and small business issues as well, another important component, particularly in our region where there's so many small businesses. So I'd like to ask all of you for an overview to start off, and also I'll just touch base because of time on a couple of questions. I'll give them on the front end, so I think many of you might want to incorporate those in your introduction. But as we're looking at retirement, specialists encourage people, as I mentioned, to start thinking early. Start thinking in your 20s and 30s, and that's not easy now. Younger people are helping out their older family members. We also have situations where so many younger people are paying for student loans at a time when it's very difficult, and they're trying to mass together money to maybe buy a house or move forward. So these are all things that make it very difficult on younger people to save, but the importance of that is very real. And secondly, we'll touch base later on, but with our second 2 panelists, but in this initial statement, the importance is and the differences in businesses now, how employers can have a different role, and how industries have changed, and what opportunities might be there now that weren't there before. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Kathleen. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your important work. This is really something that is one of the most pressing needs in our country, and your work there has been particularly important, and I know you've been traveling all around the country in this. So.
Thank you. Well, as you know, Secretary Marty Walsh, who's very familiar with Massachusetts and the challenges that we face, not only in Massachusetts and of course around the country, has asked me to focus on the issue of retirement security, which is a huge issue for Americans. In fact, Gallup has done a poll for the last 20 years about what is the top financial question that Americans face. And they've learned that the number one financial challenge, the number one worry among Americans is retirement. They care about that more than health care and more than any other financial security. And in fact, Allianz did a poll and found that 40-year-olds, 80% of 40-year-olds are more worried about running out of money in retirement than of death itself.
Wow.
They're so afraid. Retirement scares people. And usually, as you know, Congressman, that when so many people are worried about an issue, whether it's minimum wage or whether it's health care, you usually have a movement. They come and lobby you in Congress. But that's not happening with retirement. And the reason is because most people with retirement blame themselves. They think it's their fault that they haven't saved enough. And so the word puts them into a fetal position. They think, oh my God, I'm scared. It's my doing. And they're filled with shame and guilt. And when people are filled with shame and guilt, they can't ask Congress or state legislators to do a lot of changing. And I think what my job, and I think all of us here are to do it, is to say this is not an individual challenge. This is a systemic issue. And I compare it to what happened in the 1970s. At that time, a lot of people were dying on the highways. And the question at that time was, did we blame the driver or did we change the system? And what we did is we changed the system. The government changed how roads were built. Ralph Nader said that cars should be built more safely. We put in seat belts. We made sure there were buzzers about, if you got too close to another car. We changed the laws on .08. As you know, I don't think anybody in 1970 even knew what .08 meant. And now it's been cut in half, the number of people die on the highways. So we said we're going to have a systemic change. And I think that's what we have to do with retirement. We have to have a systemic change on how we do retirement. Yes, we can help people save, but it's not just by telling people, but by making it easier for everybody to save when they're young. Not just by saying it, but by making it easier, by changing laws, by having different products, and by making businesses putting in different retirement systems.
So I think you're absolutely right, because if you look at it, we really haven't changed our fundamental thinking about retirement from the governmental perspective very much from Social Security. And Social Security still remains the number one source of retirement for 90% of the people. But there's so much more. People can't live on Social Security alone.
Exactly right.
And so we have to expand the opportunities for people.
Exactly
and
right.
We have to be a partner in that, because people can't do this by themselves. And so that's a great way to start off the conversation, by saying change is necessary. It's amazing that we haven't had this kind of discussion before. That's why we're here today. And we have to do so much.
And it can be done.
And it can be done, just as we reduced in half the number of motor vehicle homicides, as you mentioned, as an analogy. So I just want to have some remarks, too, from a person from an institution near and dear to my heart, Boston College. Maybe you can tell us what you've been doing there and what you could say in terms of this very important issue.
Sure. Well, thanks again very much for having me here today and being part of this. Just staying right with what you were talking about. I mean, you mentioned the point that Social Security is the single most important source of income that people have. And that's the program that I want to talk about for just a couple of minutes and give people some information that they may or may not know, but is really important for them to keep in mind when they're thinking about retirement. First of all, Social Security income is a particularly valuable source of income because it lasts for as long as you live, comes every month, it's reliable, it's inflation protected, and it also has family benefits associated with it. So it's not just the worker themselves You also have benefits for a spouse. You have benefits for a widow or widower, and those can be particularly valuable. So you also said that Social Security is designed as the base. Very much true. It's not supposed to be the only source of income, and we're going to get into the private savings part of the retirement system shortly. But those other sources are important to supplement Social Security. So the second thing I want to mention is that when you're thinking about retirement, the decision about when you claim your benefits is actually one of the most important financial decisions you will ever make. The reason is, first of all, I mentioned how valuable this type of income is. So if you have a valuable source of income, you'd like to have more of it. One way to get more of it is to delay when you claim Social Security. You can start as early as 62, but you can claim as late as 70.
And it's a huge percentage difference as you delay.
It's a huge percentage difference. You get 7 to 8% more in your monthly check for each year you delay. So if you can make it all the way to 70, great. But if you can make it from 62 to 64.
Right, it's not one or the other.
No. I mean, you can make it from 64 to 66. So any little bit you can add is a big benefit.
Andy, you can also even delay a certain number of months.
That's right.
If you can,
That's good.
you know,
That's a good
2.5
point.
years.
And that makes
That's
a big
right.
difference.
And that makes it bigger.
That's
Monthly check.
That's a really good point.
So I'm glad you touched on that because in Congress, as you know, there are discussions because of Social Security and the solvency, and we should just privatize it. And I must tell you, those are very real discussions, and many very influential members of Congress really are pushing this. So it's the worst thing, in my opinion, you could do is throw away the one successful lifeline we've had in terms of financial security for so many Americans, but strengthen it and make sure we're looking at all the options to make it work. And the options, which is a great segue over to Mark, the options are plentiful, actually, in terms of what you do. It's not Social Security, here's your age, what you do. And there's also discussions, which you might want to get into, to even extend it beyond 72 and do some of the other things to provide more flexibility. So with that, Mark, it's a great chance for you to.
Well, great. As you say, Congressman, there are options. There are pension plans in the private sector, 401ks, individual retirement accounts, IRAs. We have something like 60 million Americans who've accumulated savings for retirement in our very large, expansive private pension system. But when people change jobs or if they move in and out of the workforce, that's another place where, to your theme, Kathleen, we need to make it easier.
And that wasn't contemplated years ago when they were doing the Social Security system either. So.
Right. In the private sector, because the employers are the basis for our 401ks and our pension plans, if you move from one employer to another, you've got to question what do you do with your money. Do you spend it now, which hopefully you don't have to do because the purpose is to save it for retirement? Do you leave it in the old employer's plan? Do you move it, which is usually the best thing to do, but not always, to your new employer's plan?
And you know, this is so important because if you look at like my parents' generation, so many people had basically one job their whole life.
Right.
Or maybe two.
Right.
And the statistics, I don't know if you
12
have
to
those
15
times.
Amazing. Americans tend to change jobs. Many Americans change jobs that often or even more, and of course have 2 or 3 jobs at the same time. So we need to make it easier to deal with retirement generally, as you were saying, Kathleen, and in particular to move your money with you.
How easy is that
as
now
you change
compared
jobs?
to years ago?
Not as easy as it used to be. I mean, as it should be. It is hard because it can be frustrating. You can shuttle back and forth between your old employer and your new employer, each of whom is asking for different information. And what we lack is a requirement, first of all, that employers will accept a transfer from an old employer to a new employer. We lack a uniform standard way to do the paperwork. The paperwork for each employer can be different. One of them wants this kind of representation or verification. Another wants that kind of signed document. And those kinds of differing non-standard requirements can make it frustrating for the individual. The burden falls on the individual.
That is exactly what I was going to ask
Right.
you. Because when you're changing jobs, don't just go to the HR if there is an HR. Some of the corporations and companies are very small. They may not have an HR department.
Right.
And just assume, well, here's my benefits. Ask questions.
Ask questions, ask your employer if you're leaving for help, how do I roll my money over, or that's sort of a technical term for transferring or moving my money to my new employer's plan. The new employer needs to be willing to accept it. If we make it easy for the employers as well as the employees and standardize all the paperwork, it'll be reasonable to ask the new employers to accept all such transfers.
What a great segue.
Can I just add one thing, if you don't mind? Because I'm so... Boston College, Andy has done the studies on this. Because it's so difficult, the average 60, you can say it, Andy. What is it? The average 60-year-old loses 30% of their retirement savings because it's so difficult to transfer.
What we call leakage, right? The money leaks out before you get to retirement.
30%. Yeah. That's how much is lost. $92 billion is lost every year because of the lack of being able to take it from job to job. So we need to change it.
And that is, and introducing Andy as well.
Not Andy,
with your
sorry.
background with the small businesses, this is something that employers want to do.
Correct.
Employers want to keep, with 12 to 15 people moving jobs, and then what we've seen after COVID, where people are coming, they want to keep employees, and one of the things is to have a good retirement system there in place. So we have to give employers, small businesses in particular, more tools. Maybe you want to talk about that with your background.
Yeah, that's right. So, one of the big things is outside of real estate, right? We were talking about real estate a little bit earlier before this panel began. And outside of real estate, Americans, invest primarily through a workplace savings plan, right? And most of American workers are working at a small business. So I grew up in the Boston area. I worked at a restaurant on the Cape too many years ago.
We need you back.
So yeah, I was here last week, spending a lot of money on my children at all the small businesses on the Cape. So you guys should know that. But here's the problem: is that in these small businesses, some estimates are 25 million Americans across the country are not covered. When we say not covered, their employers don't have a workplace savings plan. So if that's the primary way that they're going to be able to invest and save for their future in the private market, they need to have options available to them, right? And so Congress, as you know, and Congressman, your help in this, a couple of years ago made some important changes, right? So we talk about systemic changes. There's also, I would say, very important when you go along the path, some tweaks to rules to help these small businesses offer an option for their workers to be able to save more. So I can give a quick little overview here. So the analogy I would make is in the past, we had these things called multiple employer plans, where you had small businesses that could connect together to offer a plan, okay? So in the Falmouth, Cape Cod realm, you could have Cuffy's and Soft as a Grape, and they could create their own, right? They could create their own Cape Cod Sweatshirt Association multiple employer plan, okay? My daughter has many sweatshirts from Cuffy's. So they could do that because they had a similar industry in a similar region, okay? However, the problem was that they had to administer it themselves. It was very hard to do. What Congress did, and what Congressman Keating here helped do, was to change some rules. So now you could have Pirates Cove, you could have Treehouse, you could have the Quarterdeck.
I'm glad you mentioned that. One of the most important pieces that we got to get.
Right? You could have all of them band together with other small companies from across the country. They can get economies of scale, and they can offer something that is simple and help their employees save earlier. Because if you look at small businesses versus larger businesses, they are predominantly, they skew more towards women, minorities, younger workers, et cetera. And so if we can give them options, that's just going to help solve part of this problem that we see.
And as I've gone around my region, and it's clear, when I ask what's happening right now for an issue, whether it's a nonprofit organization, whether it's a small business, the number one thing is I don't have enough employees. and people are moving around and they're competing.
It's a competitive benefit,
and
and,
it's so
and labor is hard right now.
So I mean, for these
employers.
small businesses, they have to have a leveler playing field than the big corporations who have the opportunity to do much more of this. So we have to give small businesses a greater chance to keep workers, keep them more secure, and this is one of the most important things we can do. And I think chambers of commerce are very effective in giving information to small businesses, and we are too. But if there's employers out here, make sure you're availing yourself of all the opportunities you have to try and participate in these, because it's going to help with employee retention.
That's right.
And it's going to actually, in the bigger picture, help all of us moving forward. But we have to have that level playing field. And so we have to continue to do more in that regard. But you're right, that was a huge change, and one that was extremely valuable.
And Andy, isn't it the case also that small businesses tend to have higher costs when they're providing a
Yes.
retirement plan? The costs are much lower than people think. It's much easier for a small business to have a 401k or another plan. But if they can group together the way you were describing, then the average cost through economies of scale goes down.
The administration costs, you're right, for a small business.
Yeah.
It goes down, and the administrative work. So that's one of the biggest things that we have found, is that employers that are looking for this, right? Cost is number one.
Right.
The second is they don't have the time, and they don't have the skill to be able to administer this type of benefit. And if they can offload that somewhere else,
Right.
that's a huge benefit to them.
Yeah, these are things that, unfortunately, Mark said, you have to take some of the responsibility yourself to find these things out. But there are resources, whether they're with the Labor Department and what Kathleen is doing in her department, there are resources to get answers to these questions.
Yes.
And our office often is contacted by people when it's too late. They hadn't have made the decisions earlier enough to benefit themselves. So it's very important as you go along in this new environment we have with people the job changing that's going on, to really make sure you know the rules of the game. And the rules are changing, and we have to do more. So what I want to do quickly is to just talk about some of the other related issues that will impact, because you almost can't deal with financial security issues without looking at some of the other entitlements besides Social Security. I mean, Medicare. And we, just looking at it, maybe you'd want to comment on the recent law that was just changed with these laws are so big, people don't know what is inside them, but the Inflation Reduction Act that was just passed and signed into law. And it really strengthened Medicare enormously and dealt with prescription drug prices. I don't know if anyone wants to jump in on that, but that provides the income where if you have this, then you can delay, as Mark mentioned, even delaying months, if not a year, from taking your Social Security benefits, then you'll have the opportunity better to delay and get more out of your Social Security, as well as just your overall cost of living. Does anyone want to comment on the recent law?
Yeah, I think you can't underscore the progress that made. It kind of flew under the radar for a while, and all of a sudden, this new law passes. The Medicare provisions really, really important. They're going to be phased in slowly over a few years, but prescription drug prices have been just horrible for people to deal with, and the fear of having very high prices is. You brought this new act is going to bring the cap down to $2,000.
$2,000, which is amazing because they're cancer patients and other patients, or patients with, rarer types of disease, and the prescription drug prices are enormous. Yeah. And the biggest purchaser that could use that leverage to get better prices
It's terrific.
was taken out by Big Pharma out of the game years ago.
Yep.
Now they can negotiate those prices, but more importantly, there'll be certainty. People will know it's only $2,000 out of pocket for those prescription drug prices. And for the people on insulin, where it's almost unconscionable, the increases in insulin for so many people, particularly older people demographically. Now that would be capped for Medicare people at $35 a month, no more than $35 a month. Those things allow you to have the financial certainty to make some of the decisions we're talking about. I don't know if anyone
Congressman,
else,
also to your point about the importance of this new law that was just signed into law by the President, the people who are not yet on Medicare are getting limits continued limits on the amount they have to spend in order to have basic coverage. People who would not get health coverage at work because they don't have an employer or they have an employer that doesn't provide a health plan, they can get coverage thanks to the Affordable Care Act at a limited cost. And those limits on the cost for moderate income, lower and moderate income people, it goes up into the middle class, are being continued for 3 more years under this law.
That's so important because so many people in this region fall into that area.
Yeah.
Certainly we have people at the poverty level, people that have financial needs, and we have richer people too. But those people in the middle were caught. And that's a part of this plan that people don't pay much attention to, but the extension of the Affordable Care Act to cover those people, so there's some coverage there. And again, that helps businesses as well, the smaller business. So I'm glad you brought that up. That's one of the parts of this that people don't recognize the significance of economically. And that, again, deals with financial planning, as Kathleen mentioned before. We can't wait till we're nearing the age to make some of these investments besides. This will provide a little more certainty and financial security, so some of those choices can be made. Because if it was my household and I had to make a decision between I need health care insurance, I'd like to put even a little bit away for the future, but I can't afford it. This will allow them that option that wasn't there before. And before we transition to the people that are already on Social Security, I just wanted to emphasize, if any one of you, if people are maybe 20, 30, 40 years old, Kathleen mentioned 40s, because I think they're seeing their parents.
Yeah.
One of the reasons that realization comes, they're seeing their own parents.
Absolutely.
Going through this. I think people should understand how even a little bit of money, and there's ways to do this, there's new ways to do this if you want to comment. Even small amounts of money when you're younger will have a magnificent return through the course of that.
Absolutely, and the younger you start, the more you'll have when you finally reach the age of retirement.
And people shouldn't say it's not enough, it's not worth doing.
It's a habit. It's a matter of establishing a habit of regular saving.
It might be interesting to point out that there are now 12 states that have passed laws which make it easier to save. As we talked about, it's difficult for small businesses to set up retirement plans. That is just true. I may be a really good hairdresser, but I don't know how to set up a retirement plan. And I've talked to a lot of hairdressers. You may not notice that today, but I really did try.
There's one thing I thought we settled before we started this. No hair comments. No hair comments.
But
I strongly support that.
But so 12 states have said any business that does not have a retirement plan has to put 5% of their employees' salary into a state-run IRA unless the employee objects. And in those states, 70% of the employees have decided to put that money into the state-run IRA. And that's 70% of the people who have never been able to save before. So now over $500 million is saved in the United States that was never saved before. It's really quite extraordinary.
And you save 2 ways. You not only save because you're younger and there's more years to the investment, but there's a tax advantage to putting the money there versus, so you're saving 2 ways.
Right, and Kathleen's pointing to the fact that these IRAs, though the state arranges it, they're private sector IRAs. They're in the same kinds of investments that 401k, private sector
And they're
401k
voluntary
plans
for the
are in.
employers.
They're voluntary. For the employee who wants to opt out of it, if you can't save this year, but you're going to be able to save next year, you can opt out. That's what Kathleen, 70% of the people are in it. 30% have to opt out for the moment, but they're going to start saving next year. And that builds the habit of saving so that later on, even if you don't have much money now and you can only put away a tiny bit, as you were saying, Congressman, getting the habit, it makes it automatic and you don't notice that it's not in your take-home pay after you get used to this for a while.
And it builds a culture, I think,
That's it.
among the employees of understanding that saving for retirement is just part of the game. It's part of what you need to do.
Right.
My son, who's 16, got his first job this summer. We were talking about tax withholdings and saving for retirement and everything else, and teaching him early on that. But I think what does happen is if you go to an employer and you don't know what to do, if they don't have an HR department, you're going to go to your fellow worker and ask them what do they do. And in these states, I think the mandate to offer and the opportunity for them to opt out if they can't do it at that time, it's going to start to build a baseline of understanding of the importance of retirement savings early, which is critical.
And I think we also have to understand too, the importance for our country that this happens, because if we don't start doing these things and have these options in place and people and employers could take advantage of this, in the absence of that, this geometric triangle that's building is going to overwhelm government. Because if people don't have the money to live off of, then they will end up with Medicaid, or they will end up with other kinds of public assistance where they may not have had to otherwise. And that's going to cost everyone.
So it's an investment for the states
I
that
can
have
give you
these
statistics
programs.
right now.
Go ahead.
That if Pennsylvania shows that if nothing is done, these states are facing 11.8 billion and Virginia 14.3 billion fiscal burden over 15 years. I mean,
So that's 15 years is a pretty short time.
I just happen to have the statistic for you right in front of you.
But no, this is important. I started out with my initial statement saying when we were in this area of division in our country, where can we find areas to unite us? I can't think of anything bigger than this, because it helps whether you're ultra-conservative fiscal person and you're worried about government spending, or whether you're someone that wants to be able to have your own success in your life with your family, have your own home, be able don't want to be a burden on your sons and daughters. I know that there are people, grandparents, so many of them take care of their sons and daughters and grandchildren financially. And there are instances where sons and daughters help their grandparents. Like before some of these programs, my own father, who was doing 4 jobs at the time during the very tough times for our country during the Depression, he was also giving money at home because there was nothing else there. So grandparents, parents, they don't want to be a burden to their child either. So this is important socially, as building a culture, as Andy said. This is so important to unite us. Now, we have some limited time left, but we spent a lot of time focusing on getting to the stage of retirement, and we touched upon a little bit with Social Security what we can do when you're on retirement. But as people are on retirement savings and monies and Social Security, it's tough right now. And there's so many complications. On paper, they might be disqualified for a lot of things because they have, enough equity, enough savings. But so much of that is in your home. And as you know, with home prices around here, what's happening, you don't have the option the way you would before to sell your home, take that money and move into something more affordable, because there's nothing available that's more affordable. So they use the term house poor. So, again, it's important to deal with these issues. So what can we do for the people that are on retirement? I think Mark mentioned it. Watch carefully when you make that first decision when to take your money. But if you can come in with some good suggestions for those on retirement right now.
Well, one of the, and I find it very funny that I'm talking because I've learned this from Andy and from Boston College. So I have to give credit where credit is due, which is that, when we used to have pensions, you knew that when you retired, you would get a monthly paycheck for the rest of your life.
And insurance usually in the old days.
So I'm a big fan of pensions, I have to tell you. But nowadays what happens is you often get a lump sum. And the issue with the lump sum payment, as Andy has pointed out, is that there are a couple of challenges. One, the studies have shown that 20% of the people spend that lump sum within 5 years. So at the end of 5 years, they have no money left. That's number one, a real challenge. Second of all, because people get a lump sum and they don't know when they're going to die, they're nervous about how to use it, and that nervousness and that stress causes what we call cognitive decline. That is, they get so nervous, anxiety, and they don't know really how to spend it, and they get, I guess it's called stupid. Can I say? I don't know if,
No.
I don't think I should say that.
They're worried that they'll run out of
Okay,
money.
I'm not, you're going to have to come up with a
And when that
better
happens
word.
too,
So
you know,
that's
I was a
another
DA
problem.
before this, but and we dealt with cases, people took advantage of that.
Well, you know,
Caregivers and
Yeah.
people committing
Well,
fraud,
the-
so you're more susceptible to that too.
well, actually, in the United States, because in Europe they have more pensions, in the United States we have more lump sum payments. We have 5 times as much senior fraud as they do in Europe. Apparently, I'm not allowed to say that there's a correlation, but you can imagine that there might be. So one of the things that, again, I love quoting Boston College when they're sitting right
Go for
next
it.
to me.
Yes, we appreciate it.
But what they've said is that it's a much better idea is to try to develop lifetime income products in which you can buy something that says, I know that I'm going to get every 2 weeks a payment, because then I am going to have a peace of mind that I'm never going to run out of money. And so one of the things that we're working on at the Department of Labor is helping businesses such as Fidelity and others to have these kind of products so that people can have peace of mind. Because in our senior years, what we need more than a large lump sum is a knowledge that we'll never run out of money.
Yeah, and what's interesting, if I could go back to the Medicare change that we had with the inflation reduction, that $2,000 cap, that $2,000 can be paid in monthly payments too. So even that is not going to hit people all at once. But go ahead. You're gonna go ahead.
No, I was going to say, for one thing, give Mark his due here in this conversation as well, has been really helpful throughout his career in helping to expand the notion of making it easier to get inflation-protected, annuities generally.
Yes.
Lifelong sources of income. And he took some steps when he had the opportunity to make that easier as well.
Thank you, Andy. And this is really important. In a sense, when you get a lifetime income from the private sector, you're supplementing your Social Security. Just as you know Social Security will last for your whole life, you can add to that monthly benefit this additional amount from a private sector, a sound, solid, and reasonably priced provider of lifetime income. And that's something that I've been, when I was in government as well, fascinated by the interest that regular folks have in being able to augment, to add to their Social Security benefits, whether delaying it a little bit, if you can afford to do that till you're a little older and get a bigger Social Security check, and or by getting additional lifetime income, maybe from your employer's plan. In some cases, you can ask your employer, do you have that? Or in other cases, buying it from an insurance company on the market.
And as you're mentioning supplementing, and we're mentioning pensions, I'll just mention, we could do a whole program on this, and we can't unfortunately now, but there are people that are state and municipal employees in Massachusetts that are getting penalized, in my view, with the WEP provision, the windfall, they call it windfall elimination provision, I believe, but whatever it is, there's legislation to deal with that. I'm a strong supporter. Hopefully we can get some done. It's been years and years and years, but that's a case of pension and supplements where, unfortunately, Massachusetts is one of the states where we're hit with that. But I also want to talk about, I mentioned in the beginning how many differences there are in the workforce. And if we can, just for a few seconds here, because it's an important issue, dealing with women, and demographically, there's a difference. We all know that women aren't paid the same amount as men for the same work. So the disparity with wage carries over with a lot of the pension security or plans and the monies they have on the private sector in that regard. And certain minority groups, people call it, these are just statistics that are there. And with so many women, primarily, they're the ones, and that's statistics, they're the ones leaving the workforce more than men for childcare. We saw it with the COVID situation, the pandemic hit. Disproportionately, women had left, and they had difficulty getting back in. Right. And a lot of that's childcare. So they're not getting the same wage base.
And they live longer.
Because of initial discrimination on wages, and secondly, they're statistically more apt than men to go ahead and rear children and take time that way away from them. And then you have a lot of women in a situation where there's household is going on dual income, and men too, the same. And then one of them passes away, and all of a sudden your income is drastically changed. So these are all things that we should really be looking at more to see what we can do to help in this regard. Any ideas from anybody?
Well,
I was going to say, just that's really important to bring up. And one good thing about the debates over Social Security and fixing its long-term finances so we can rely on it forever is, at the same time, it's brought up these questions of targeted benefit increases for certain groups. And I think that discussion is very relevant to what you're talking about, because one of those things discussed has been a caregiver credit. There's a bunch of the bills that are floating around, which you're well familiar with, would include a caregiver credit to give women or men, anybody taking time out of the workforce.
And it's not just for children.
No,
It'd be
no, it's not.
caregiving
Could also be
parents.
for the elderly parents. Exactly right. They could get credit for Social Security purposes of having worked and done something of value that goes into their Social Security earnings record. So that's one step. Another one, speaking directly to what happens when someone dies, is enhancing that survivor benefit in Social Security that the survivor gets, the widow or the widower can get. Both those have been part of the discussion, and I think that's encouraging, that at the same time we're looking at the long-term situation of Social Security, we're also concerned with some fairness and equity in making the system better.
and in the private pension system, likewise, for people who are not yet at retirement age and who are trying to save and accumulate a nest egg for themselves, we've brought automatic enrollment into 401ks. That is, instead of you're having to sign up to be part of if your employer sponsors a plan, as so many do, instead of having to sign up for it, and a lot of us hesitate to sign up because we're trying to decide how to invest or how much to put into the plan. We want to discuss it maybe with a spouse or a partner over the weekend, and then next week is busy and we forget to sign up, and a year or two, 5 go by.
And so many young people think they're immortal.
And you think you're
looking at
immortal
these
when
issues,
you're that age.
Sure.
And so now most of the larger 401ks and many smaller employer plans will just put people in the plan automatically, let them opt out. So it's
Sure.
freedom of choice for the individual. If you can't afford to save now even a little bit, you can step out or you can save less, but you're automatically put into the plan without having to do any paperwork. And that is has made a big difference for women and people of color and lower wage workers in general, who have participated much less, even when they have a chance to have an employer plan, participated less than other people. Automatically putting people in raises that participation rate hugely for those groups.
And the level of savings. And then there's, certain plans where you could have employers who allow you to do automatic increases on an annualized basis up to, so if you have an employer that starts lower than what, typically you would want them to be saving at, they can go and tick up year by year. That happens automatically.
Right.
Less likely that anybody would ever go, any employee would go and make that active change themselves in some of that.
So
area.
if you're saving like 3% of your pay when you're hired, to Andy's point, the
tick up
next
to
year it's
8 to
4%,
10.
the next year it's 5%, you're going up, and you can, as an individual, you can stop that any time, or you can accelerate. So I want to go right to 10%.
And there's a
now.
huge tax advantage to do
Yes.
it.
Yes.
Sure.
Yes.
Well, and also
Absolutely.
your plan, the PEPs and the state plans are usually going after those businesses that didn't used to offer retirement plans, and those are the plans. Usually, women and minorities work in those businesses that didn't offer retirement plans because they are often working in places that are low income.
Well, you have
for inland-
hospitality industry
So
too, where
that
it's
so that
seasonal
helps.
here, and that makes
Right.
it so difficult.
So
on
that helps
people.
them a great
Right.
deal as well. And the interesting statistic is that African Americans sign up at a greater rate than whites in these white people at this plan. So it's kind of counterintuitive, you may say, but that's
No, it makes
actually
sense.
interesting because they see very much the need to sign up for retirement. So I just thought
Yeah.
that's an important aspect of what we've learned when we see who's signing up.
I knew we'd get to this point where, we've touched so many areas and there's more questions than answers, but I think we're going to have to conclude soon. So I'm just curious, if you could, for people that are listening to this, where can you point them to get more information? Where can you point them in a direction where they can get more particularized information?
Boston College.
Boston
College.
College.
And that's open, is that open to the public? If people
All of
hear,
the information is freely available on our website, crr.bc.edu.
all right, hopefully we can put that on the screen. What is that again?
crr.bc.edu.
All right, at the end, perhaps we'll put that up, but that's available to anyone, not just alums, right?
Yes, no.
Like myself.
And
Not just alums.
And I can say, as someone who's not at Boston College but admires the work they do, it's readable. Like, it's
all right.
understandable. You don't
Which
have
wasn't
to
the
be.
case when I studied there all the time. It was very tough.
Also, the U.S. Labor Department,
yes, I should
where
say the
Kathleen
Department of
is a
Labor.
great
Yeah, any
source.
place there, Kathleen,
information.
that they
Yes.
could tap into information.
EBSA, Department of Labor at EBSA.
EBSA.
EBSA has excellent information as well.
Yeah.
And just from the private side, Andy, there are a lot of people can look to their own plans and their own companies that they might want to invest in and get some advice as well.
That's right. I mean, and then there's, if you're working at any small business, local chambers of commerce typically, or, National Chamber of Commerce would have a lot of other resources that they could use.
Yeah. And I guess I'd leave with this too. If you're working somewhere, you take the initiative and ask your own HR department or whoever is designated in that. Don't just assume they will tell you. There's great disparities, maybe because of the cost and many other issues, with one company versus another company, one business versus another. Some of them will sit down and really go over these things with a new employee or existing employees when it's time to make changes or make them aware of things. Others will provide the paperwork maybe and just say, well, it's there. If you didn't see it, it's your fault. So I think ask questions, make sure you're getting all the answers. Use the resources that are here, and at whatever state you are, whether you're 20-year-old just starting work for the first time, realizing just a few dollars would make a huge difference down the road. Whether you're someone that, as Kathleen mentioned, in the 40s, there seems to be a great, all of a sudden, a euphoric moment, not euphoric, but eureka,
Fear.
a eureka moment that all of a sudden this is going to be upon you in a few years, maybe because you're seeing it with your own parents,
Yeah.
or whether you're already on retirement one way or another, stitching together private and public. Don't just assume that there aren't choices you can make as well if you're in that. So wherever you are on that spectrum, it's really important to ask those questions, and it's important because it's a lifetime decision-making process. It's not just, whatever age you might be, here's the papers, that's it, those are my options. You clearly have decisions that can be made, plans that can be done. They'll have enormous effect on the quality of your life, your family's life, your children's life, where you as parents, and later on, your grandchildren. So regardless of where you are on that spectrum, please take advantage. I hope we've been helpful in giving this. And any final comments?
Well, Congressman, two other sources of great information. AARP. AARP has a great website information. And the federal government has a financial literacy website, financial capability, financial literacy, where people can learn in plain English a lot of the basics of investing and saving for retirement.
Right.
I would just add to that, the Social Security website itself has a lot of helpful information, and obviously they have people there who are experts in the program who are waiting for you in their offices or to call on the phone. The offices have reopened now, and that's a good resource as well.
That's right, and I just, in our experience with Social Security and the administration here, they'll steer you to the website, but if you are patient enough, you can talk to an individual who will give you direct answers and calculate and figure out where you stand.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I think I'm going to just end by thanking Mark, thanking Andy. Kathleen, thank you for your work, not just today, but all around the country in that regard. Andy, thank you so much. You really offered, a great overview of how pragmatically we can deal with this. And if people are interested, these are things we can follow up on, but thank you all for listening. I hope it was helpful. I hope you can take advantage and empower yourself, your family, and your children with a better financial future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman.